Greetings, everyone, and welcome to today's session, Intro to Modus 2.0. Thank you all for joining and your notebots for filling up our lobby. We'll get started right away here, but first off, I did want to mention to those of you who were at InfoComm last week, thank you for stopping by, signing up for free trials, and we have a lot of new users on board with us today. We have a lot to cover, so we will jump right into it. I'll start with few quick points of housekeeping. My name is Patrick Higaki. I handle sales and marketing here at Modus. Joining me today is one of our co-founders, Ken Bruick, who will be presenting, as well as Riley Perk from our client services team. We will do live questions and answers, so please, as we're going through this process, feel free to either use the chat window or the Q&A section to post your questions, and we will do our best to answer them all live and in real time. With that, I'm going to hand the keys over to Ken and let him get started.
Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate it. So the goals for today are to give you a quick crash course on how to use Modus. We'll spend the bulk of the time just building out a really simple conference room. Along the way, I'm going to share some tips and tricks, hopefully cover a lot of hotkeys, and we'll even talk a little bit about when to use Modus. Actually, we'll start with that one. So Modus being a rapid visualization tool built specifically for AV, you should use it pretty much anytime you need to rapidly visualize something for AV. So that can be anything from really high visual fidelity, finished designs, to the other end of the spectrum where it is just a really ugly and simple validation of an idea or quickly testing a concept, but also anything in between. So brainstorming things, pre-sales. Our favorite is using it live with a client, much like we're doing today. But it doesn't even have to be client facing. Sometimes being able to show something to your install techs is also super valuable. With that out of the way here, let's jump in. So after you have installed Modus and you click on the Modus icon, you're going to be presented with this. And so if you saw us at InfoComm, you may have not even noticed this application if we didn't have time to show you. This is what we call the launcher. So this is your gateway into the Modus ecosystem. We're not going to spend a ton of time on the launcher, but there are some pretty key things that are good to know here. The homepage, it's always going to be updated with the latest news. So this will show the most changes whenever there is a new release or a hot fix. Quick start. If you want to just jump into Modus, this big red button is the way to do that. You're always launching a session. You could think of a session as a call, but sometimes you're on that call alone. Recent work is pretty self-explanatory. Files, this tab is where you can see all of the files that you have built in Modus. You can also click this little Explorer icon up here, and that'll actually open up File Explorer, which is often a more robust way to interact with things. 360s, this is where your 360s go. So when you generate a 360, which we cover in the second webinar, which is next Thursday, is that right, Patrick? Quick plug for that. Did you already put a link to register for that in chat? If not, it's coming soon. Be sure to register for that because we'll cover deliverables, including creating 360s. When you create one, they show up here. Settings has some useful stuff for getting the most out of Modus, and then help videos are some quick start things. Other quick call out, please do check out the feedback forums and issue reporter. Forums are always handy for discussion, asking questions, requesting features, things like that. If you do post a question in the forums, please make sure you come back and check out the response. We're really good at responding, but oftentimes discussions die off there. Oh, it's actually Tuesday the 30th.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I was tabbed over. So Tuesday is documentation, Thursday is the advanced session.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. All right, so with all of that said, we are going to do the quick start, and I will launch a session of Modus. Now, one other thing about sessions, that is how you can also do a multi-user environment. You can invite other people, other Modus users to join you. That's a little bit more complicated to set up, so we're not going to cover it in actually any of our webinars, but if you are interested in that, reach out to support@modusvr.com or paste a question in chat. We can give you the steps there. It's just a little bit more involved, and it is a more advanced thing, so probably not appropriate for a getting started webinar. Okay. So first things first, if you hop into Modus and it is dark, I'll explain what's happening. But before we even get there, I want to help you get set up to have a good experience in Modus. So very first thing you're going to want to do is come up to
You're going to need
settings.
to tab over your screen share.
Right. Thank you. And
Thank you.
also thank you, Patrick, for being a good example and just interrupting, because that's what we actually want here. Again, if you have questions and stuff, don't hold them to the end. Ask while it's on your mind, and Patrick and Riley will triage those questions, and some of them, they'll just interrupt me as we go, because that is a much more fun way to go. Now that I'm in Modus, I'm also sharing my little hotkey UI thingy down below, so you can on rewatch see some of the hotkeys I'm pressing if I fail to mention what I'm doing. All right, so very first thing in Modus, I want you to make sure you're having a good experience. So if you come up to settings and then do UI scale, that's how you can change the scale of your UI. This is all going to be based on your quality of vision, resolution, all those things. I'm going to crank this up a little bit higher than I normally do for the sake of the webinar. You can also change ruler scale. That'll make more sense in a little bit, but in-world rulers will show up, and that's how you can change those. Also of note, while we're in the settings, be sure to check out the controls. This is where all of the hotkeys are listed for everything you can do in Modus. Being fast in Modus is the #1 thing you'll want to master. Spend some time learning those hotkeys because it is worth it. Okay, now that I've got my UI set up, I want to talk a little bit about viewport quality. So right now, I am in the default project. My computer up here in the top right corner says I'm in high quality mode. If you are in high quality or anything higher than that, your room's going to be dark. The reason for that is because in high quality mode or higher, we're doing our best to simulate lighting, and the default room does not have any lights in it. So until we add lights, it's going to be dark. So I just clicked on the viewport settings in the top right corner. I'm going to bring this down to medium high. Now, depending on the type of machine you're on, if you have a dedicated graphics card, or if maybe you're on more of a business class machine, you might default to lower quality, or you might need to lower the quality just to have a good performing experience. And so basically the guideline is you're going to want to move this around until this FPS counter is somewhere in the 40 or above range. I'm on a pretty powerful machine here, so I'm just going to keep it at medium high, and then we'll revisit this later. But this is your gateway to controlling performance in Modus, this big slider right here. There's a couple other things of note. Effective resolution, if I lower this, it lowers the internal resolution that Modus is rendering at. That'll also give you more performance, but things will look fuzzier. Okay, with that out of the way, let's start being productive. So Modus typically has basically two modes that you're going to be operating in. You're going to be navigating around the space, or you will be interacting with the space. So the way you navigate around is by holding your right mouse button. And while you do that, the UI disappears. And you're going to keep holding the mouse button, the right mouse button, for all of these next steps. So to move forward, backward, left, and right, you're going to do W, S for forward and back, A and D for left and right, moving your mouse around to look, and then space and shift for moving up and down. And I've got these settings cranked, so I'm actually going to come back to my controls and turn them down a little bit here, just so I can move a little bit slower, and that'll keep me from moving too fast. So again, holding the right mouse button, W and S, forward and back, A and D, left and right, space and shift, up and down. Okay, so essentially you are going to do this over and over and over. You're going to position yourself in the room where you have a good angle for what you're going to work on. Once you're there, then you start interacting with the project. So some quick things about interacting with the UI. All you have to do is hover over one of the sides to get those menus to appear, and then you'll click on the different tabs to switch them. We'll actually start off in the Objects tab. So Modus is an object-based workflow. And by that, I mean you're never dealing with anything lower level than an object. So in traditional 3D modeling tools, you're working with vertices and polygons and planes. And in Modus, you're dealing with objects. You're dealing with furniture and equipment and architectural elements. So it's a very high level way of doing things, which makes things also very fast. So once you're in the Objects tab, you've got a whole, just by default, you're faced with the entirety of our library, which can be a lot. And there's two ways to filter down what you're looking for. One, you can just navigate the hierarchy here, and you can say, okay, well, maybe I'm looking for furniture and tables, in which case you'd see all of the tables, or you can simply type in table. As an aside, if you were ever searching for something and you can't find it, try using different search terms, but also let us know. There's a good chance we just haven't tagged it as properly as we should, or perhaps there's just an object that we need to add. But always please keep that feedback loop open. That's really important to us. Since we're building out a conference room, I'm going to come to this generic conference table, and I'm going to click and drag it into the space. Now, right off the bat, you might notice, if you're familiar with other 3D modeling software, that Modus behaves differently. As I drag this thing around the room, it is always going to anchor or attach to whatever surfaces are in the room. In fact, with Modus, you typically don't end up with things floating because that pretty closely mirrors how the real world behavior of things is. Are of things is are. Anyway, all right, so once I have this table in the room, let's cover the different cursor tool modes you can be in. So by cursor tool, I just mean my cursor, my mouse cursor. And those are defined by these four options up here at the top. And you're going to be in resize mode more than anything else, but you can actually switch between these modes with W, E, R, and T, respectively. W changes the handles that I can interact with to axis handles. So by default, I can just click anywhere on this object and move it around. But if I grab an arrow, I can only move the object along that axis. So that could be a really handy way to do things. And note that the arrows are basically relative to the direction the object is facing. So now that it's rotated, I'll be moving it along that axis, whatever that is now. I'm going to hit Control Z there to undo. Resize, or the E hotkey, this gives me resize handles, and these are going to vary based on the object I have selected. This is a generic table, which means I can resize it in a lot of different directions. I can change its length, I can change its width, I can also change its height. A couple of key things about interacting with resize handles. By default, it does asymmetrical resizing, meaning the right side is staying fixed, whereas the left side is stretching out. If I hold Shift, it now resizes symmetrically. And so Shift is often a modifier key to change the behavior when you're moving things around. A great example of this is rotation. If I switch to rotation mode, which is R, and I grab one of these handles, it freely rotates, but if I hold Shift, it then locks to 15-degree increments. We also have the measure mode, and this is just a really quick way to measure the distance between any two objects. By default, as you hover around things, it just shoots off a laser line perpendicular to that surface. But if I click and drag, it will give me a distance between two completely arbitrary elements.
Hey Ken, can you show
yeah.
how to show your dimensions in fractions?
Oh, yes, I would be happy to. Thank you for asking a question. This is wonderful. Okay, so far we've only been in the Objects tab. Let's actually jump over to the Project tab really quick. So the Project tab is where you set up more of global things for the entire project. This is where, if we're dealing with a rectangular room or project, we can change those dimensions, but we can also change our environment settings. If I fly outside this room, for example, and we'll come back to this later, but for now I'm going to change it to city. Now we have a nice little cityscape there. But for the question at hand, unit settings is where we can change the type of units we operate in. So we can work in imperial or metric. If we stay in feet inches, we can also change its format. So if I'm dealing in imperial, I prefer inches decimal, but you could switch it over to fractional as well. So we could go all the way up to 1/32, but let's say we just want to keep it at 1/2 inch increments as we interact with things. And as we resize them, that's where we start seeing that come into play. But I'm actually going to go back to inches decimal. One last thing while we're looking at rulers, rulers are also often interactive. So if I don't actually want this table centered in the room, and let's say I know that this left edge needs to be 4 feet from that wall, I can click on that ruler and enter a dimension, and it'll move everything by that amount. The great thing about rulers is I don't have to enter them in the same units that I am working in, so I can mix and match. So let's say I prefer inches decimal, but my room plan is in metric. I could also say 3 meters or centimeters or millimeters. So you can mix and match like that, which is really, really handy. Okay, so now we have a table in here. I want to talk briefly about the properties panel. So the workflow of Modus is very simple and repeatable. And so once you drag in an object, it doesn't matter if it's a table or a display or a window, it's going to be the same thing over and over. You bring it in, you manipulate it with your cursor tool modes, and then with it selected, you come over to the properties panel. And so the options available in the properties panel are going to change based on the type of object you have selected. When we have a table selected, our options are really simple. We can choose its material, and navigating through materials is very much like navigating through the Objects tab. By default, we suggest a handful of materials, but if you come up to the suggested list and then go up a level to all materials, it exposes the whole library of materials that can be applied to anything. And so some of these are going to make sense, and some of them are not. For example, I can make this table out of brick, and that makes 0 sense, but you could do it. But I'm going to come back to wood and just put a conic maple on there. Now, let's bring in some other objects to look at this relationship of objects to properties panel. So I'm going to come back to the Objects tab, and we're going to bring in some chairs. And I'm a really big fan of the Herman Miller Setu chair. We recently added that. Once again, I drag it in. And these chairs, I don't really want them facing perfectly forward. So we could switch to rotation mode and do it that way, which works, but it's also a little bit slow. Or regardless of my cursor tool mode, I can use my mouse wheel to rotate the object, which is a nice and fast way to do this. And the bulk of the time using your mouse wheel is going to get you exactly what you need. Now, to create copies of this chair, I could drag them in over and over and over. I could, with it selected, press Control C, and then anywhere my mouse cursor is when I press Control V, it's going to paste it, including on walls. Or in cases like this, I like to hold Alt while I drag. So I can hold Alt, click and drag, and it'll just create a copy of that chair. And then I'm going to move it to the back, use my mouse wheel to straighten it up, and then I'm going to continue creating copies. Now, when you do this, you're likely going to run into a scenario where you want to have the chair tucked under the table, but it's going to pop on top. And this is because of Modus's auto attachment logic. Sometimes doing that is hard. The easiest way to get around that is just to get comfortable navigating. So simply move to the other side of the table, use my mouse wheel to rotate, Alt drag to create a few copies. And so in just a few seconds now, we have a handful of chairs. Now, let's say that I wanted to change the material of these chairs, or at least the color of the chairs. With that chair selected, I can come over here and change its fabric. Since this is a chair you can buy, I don't have the ability to change this chair to a brick or any number of different fabrics. I can only choose what Herman Miller sells in this particular case. The same thing with the finishes for the frame. So I'm going to do, that's kind of a cool combination, but it doesn't really look great in this room. Maybe we'll stick with something like that. Now, I don't want to have to do this for every single chair. So one option would be, okay, I delete all the existing chairs and then duplicate all these copies. Another option is I can select all of these chairs at the same time. So if I select one chair and then come up here to select similar, that will select every single object that is the exact same type of object. So it doesn't care if they are configured differently, but if I click this, it's going to select all of the Herman Miller set to chairs in the project. And I can see that they're selected that way. Now when I come over to the properties panel, it shows a question mark multiple because they're not all configured the same. So I'm going to now select the Canyon fabric and graphite silver alloy, and now they're all configured the same. If I don't want to select all of the chairs, maybe I have a bunch of these other chairs in different rooms or elsewhere in the room, I can simply hold Control as I click, and that will select only the ones that I am actually arbitrarily selecting. Okay.
Ken, we got a couple quick questions.
Yeah,
while
let's do it.
It feels like you're in a transitional part of the presentation.
Yes.
First question is from Mark asking, actually they're both from Mark, but they're two different Marks. There's Mark with a C and Mark with a K. So Mark with a C asks, is there a way to hide, so I'll read the whole question. Hi there, I have a client asking for a 2D layout of the room like a floor plan. Is there a way to make the ceiling transparent or another method to show where devices live in the space?
Oh, okay. All right. So there's a couple ways you can go around doing that. So we could actually make it transparent, as in we could make it out of glass, which is not what I would recommend, but I'm going to show you how you could do it because that might trigger some other fun ideas. I select the ceiling and I just type glass and boom. But it is actual glass, so it's reflective. And if I try to click on things, it's going to be in the way. So we don't really want this for this particular scenario. The quick answer to the question is you select the object and you press Control H, and that hides it. You can also select the object, come to the Properties panel, and click Show Object. That's the exact same thing. Or even more powerfully, you can come to the Scene Outliner. This is where you see the entire hierarchy of your project. And I'll just run through this really quick because this is a great time to talk about it. You'll notice the only thing that has an arrow on it is the floor, and that's because everything else has nothing else attached to it. So the floor has a table and several chairs attached to it. If I expand it, we will see conference table and all of the chairs. You can also hide things this way. So I could mouse over ceiling and hide it. I can also lock some of these objects. So for example, let's say I keep accidentally moving the conference table. I can lock it, and now I can't accidentally drag it. I'm clicking and dragging. I'm trying to move it, but it won't let me. Since Modus is all based on attachment to determine hierarchy, the same thing ripples out when you hide objects. So if I hide the floor, it will hide everything attached to the floor. And in this case, create kind of a terrifying existence where there's no floor and you're several stories up. Great question. And then did I get all of that? It was a multi-part. Okay. And then
that's perfect. The other way would be obviously using line drawings and Modus docs, which we'll cover next week on Tuesday.
Yes. And that would be a proper 2D.
Correct. Now, Mark with a K would like to know, what are the ways to control what axis objects are rotated around? So I don't believe we have an answer to that, but I'll let you tackle it.
I mean, we have an answer, but it may not be the answer they're looking for. The answer is you don't. So, and a lot of this is in the name of speed. With traditional modeling software, you can have objects floating, you can have them oriented however you want in ways that make no sense and defy physics and all of that, which is tremendously powerful, but also slows down simple operations like placing a chair in a room. It's really easy to find yourself with that chair floating or sunken into the floor. So Modus, as part of its auto attachment and auto alignment, that also determines the rotation you can do. So for a chair, it's always going to rotate. In fact, all objects do this. They're always going to rotate on the surface on which they are anchored. So if we add a display, just a TV, for example, it's going to rotate on that wall. Now, what's interesting, though, is with this auto attachment logic, and a display is a great example, when you move this display to the table, we also use that important context to give it some feet. So then when I rotate it, it is still only rotating in the way that makes sense. Now, since I have a display up here, this is a good time to show properties for display because these are a lot different than we saw for the table and chairs. But I'll pause there. Did that hopefully that answered the question or at least addressed it?
I think it addresses the question. Certainly, there are ways to hack that, which we could cover in a completely separate training. But for the intent of this particular training, we'll go with the answer given.
Perfect.
So
okay,
please,
and I saw a
venture on.
question. I saw a follow-up question on hiding things, and because we probably won't come back to hiding, so now's a good time. So when I hide the ceiling, by default, anything attached to it also disappears. So I just tossed in a ceiling mic there, and that also disappears. Now, you can override that by coming into your outliner and navigating that tree and saying, nope, the ceiling is hidden, but I do still want to show this microphone. And so now that microphone is basically floating, but that might be an important part of our story that we wanted to tell. So for example, let's say that we were using the hiding functionality to create kind of like a nice isometric view here, showing that mic. And let me need to restyle this room here really quick. There we go. Hiding that ceiling might be a good thing, but we might still want to show that equipment. That's how you would do it. And if we are trying to do an isometric, maybe we would change our background to just pure white. So you can get a really cool view just like this. Okay, I'm going to bring everything back just for the rest of what we're doing here. Bring the room back to its state. Okay. All right. Any additional questions we want to pause on?
I think we're good.
Okay, great. All right, so we're starting to build out the room. I mean, this is a really basic room. If we're being responsible, we would probably add some windows and things like that. I'll just bring in this guy here. The windows are also another example of really simple objects that offer a few settings that are important. We might want to change how those look. Maybe we want our glass to be transparent, which I left the outside as bright white. So it's going to look a little strange until I go back to my project tab and change the environment to something more appropriate. Now let's actually dress this up just a hair more, and we'll switch over our viewport quality. So I selected the ceiling. I'm going to change this to a drop ceiling because in a commercial environment, that's probably what we want. And then to keep this from being a terrible, terrible existence, I am going to add a door. And on the door, I have options like swing. Okay, so that's looking decent. I'm going to add some lights to this room, and I'm going to show you a couple of things that are really important to understand. So while I'm in anything in the medium viewport quality, lights will emit light, but they do not cast shadows. Okay, if we are in low, lights don't even emit light. They're more like a prop than anything else. But I'm actually going to bring us up to high quality. And now we can see a pretty dramatic difference in the lighting quality. We are getting shadows. We're also getting sunlight. So now that we're at this spot, I'm actually going to switch over to the lighting tab. So if you are in high quality mode, when you make changes to sunlight, those will be reflected in real time. And it is awesome. And this is such a powerful storytelling tool, especially if you're talking about lighting control or worrying about sunlight splashing onto that display or anything else. Like, people get this immediately, and you feel awesome controlling the sun. And then you also have a little bit of artistic influence here if you want to change the color temperature of the sun based on time of day, things like that. But the defaults are usually pretty good there. Okay, so I'm going to lower that. Now, as I resize this light, you'll see it brings in more influence into the room. And I don't want to manually resize this thing. So I'm going to come over to the properties panel. I'm just going to type in 2 feet by 2 feet. Okay, now that's set up how we want it. Now, populating these lights, there's a handful of ways that I could do this. I could just alt drag. And while we're on that, if you alt drag on an arrow handle, when you're in axis movement mode, it'll make that movement stay exactly where you want it. While we're here, if I selected all these lights and then pressed Control G or press this button up here, it turns them into a group. Creating a group is the way that you move multiple objects at the same time. They don't have to be the same type of object. You can move a group of table and chairs, a whole front wall display, camera setup. You can do that as well. But in this particular case, since we want to align these lights in a grid, I'm going to use the array tool. And you can create an array by pressing Control A or by pressing this button in the top. You need to have one object selected or one group of objects selected to create an array. But when you do that, a couple things happen. So one, it immediately creates a second one, but only the very first one stays in full color. Everything else has this little weird kind of a gray striped pattern over it. If I select something else, that goes away. It looks normal. But this is how you know which is your reference object. So arrays are a really powerful tool of distributing the same object over and over and over in a uniform pattern. So think candle lights, LED lights, think lots and lots of chairs in a training room or multi-purpose divisible room, that type of thing. Array tool is great for these. Now, once I have created an array, when I come to the properties, note that I am controlling the properties of the array, not the object itself. And that interplay becomes important here as we look at the myriad of options available. If I actually wanted to change the properties of the light itself, I would come here and select reference object and click, in this case, generic drop ceiling LED. But if I had created an array of tables or chairs, I would get to those properties by selecting this button here. Break array will simply turn this back into individual objects. We want to keep it as an array as much as possible because there's a lot of power in that. I won't go into the huge details of this unless we have time later, but for now, what I want to do is just change the spacing between these objects. And I'm going to say maybe we want 3 along the width of the room, and I want them spaced 6 feet apart. And now, since the first one's lined up with the ceiling tiles, all of the others are. And then we'll create a handful this way. But if we notice, they are spilling outside the room, which is not what we want. So I'm going to say I want to flip the direction of lights being created on the red axis. And now they come into the room how I would hope. But we don't really need that many in that direction. And we can probably do this many. Okay, that is a very bright, well-lit room with lots of space for activities. Okay. All right, moving on from arrays. Did we have any questions about arrays or groups that we wanted to cover really quick?
Not arrays or groups, but there was a question regarding, can you customize the ceiling tile layouts like 2x4 or 18-inch instead of 2x2?
Excellent question. Short answer is not yet. But that is something that we're working on. Okay, so let's now that we've got the room built, let's start working a little bit more with technology, because up until you're working with technology, Modus is a fun visual tool, but we're not actually helping you get to your job. All right, so I can turn on incremental movement and sizing, and I'm going to keep this at 1-inch increments, and this makes resizing the display much easier. So maybe we want to do 75-inch display. I'll cover this very briefly, but the video playback in paradigm is you choose content, you push it into a channel, and then displays choose which channel they are going to subscribe to. So it can be a little bit complicated at first, but once you understand the model there, it's pretty easy to work with. So let's say for now, we just wanted to show a simple Teams call on this display. By default, all displays tune into channel 1. So now all we need to do to get content playing on here is push content into channel 1. So to do that, I come to the Media tab, hover over the content that I want to show, and then select the channel I want to push that into. So by hovering over Forza Horizon 5, and then I click on channel 1, it now shows it playing on channel 1. And up here at the top is the status of what's going on all the channels. I might have Excel playing on channel 2, and we see that Excel is on channel 2, but I don't have any displays tuned into channel 2 at the moment. So it doesn't do anything for us. But let's say we wanted to do that. Let's say we wanted to have a dual display system. I'll show you a couple of tricks on how to do that really easily. The first is I'm going to Alt drag on this arrow, and that's going to create a copy. Centering these can be a little bit of a pain. So I'm going to select them both. I could either Control plus to select all displays in my project, or I can simply Control click on the second display. Now they're both selected. If I want to move them at the same time, I'm going to turn that into a group, or Control G. And now, as I move them around, it will snap to the center. So that's a really quick and easy way to get dual displays centered. Create a copy, group them, and then move them as a group. Okay, but both displays are playing the same content. That's not very helpful. So I'm going to select this one and tell it to play on channel 2, or just tune in to channel 2. And now we have two displays playing different content. One last thing on media, because I don't want to spend too much more time on this. Some content, basically content that has this icon or this little banner with the two blue arrows, that means it's a little bit more intelligent than just static video. And to highlight this, I'm going to show front row. And I'm only going to play this on channel 1. Now, front row content, front row, you can have a single screen mode. You can have a left and a right screen mode. Front row has different layouts for different aspect ratios. Modus does a lot to make handling and showing all of those scenarios pretty easy and quick. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a copy of this. I'm just alt dragging that display to the other wall. And I'm going to tune in this one to channel 2. In fact, I don't want anything playing on channel 2. So I'm just going to come up here and stop that, which then makes this display go dark. So again, Teams has intelligence behind how it's being played because it has that icon. So to illustrate this, I'm actually going to change our aspect ratio to unlocked, which now lets me freely resize this display however I want. And as I do that, this will show us a few things that compositions or that intelligent media can do. So as I change the aspect ratio of this, all of a sudden we see that Teams call switch to a 21:9 layout once the display hits that aspect ratio. If we resize this, we'll see that the head size changes because that's a setting that you can change in Teams. And so Modus just automatically handles all of that for you. So you can very quickly say, hey, here's the experience at 82 and above. Here's the experience at 65. Here's what's going to look like at 110, 21:9. All really powerful things. But it also becomes powerful when we're looking at multi display output. So again, Teams is playing on channel 1. We want both of these displays tuned into channel 1, but we want them to be tuning in to different types of channel 1 content, which is a little bit kind of a weird thing here. But if we go to the properties panel and expand channel options, we get this sub-channel concept. So many pieces of content are not just publishing a channel, they're publishing alternate versions of content on a sub-channel. So this display now can be told to behave as a left display. And if I come to the right display and tell it to behave as a right display, they are now both tuned into channel 1, but they are showing different content. So now that these displays are saying, yes, we want to play this channel and we want to play the left and right content of that channel, if the content's available, they will do this. So if we then said, you know what, I want to show the WebEx home on channel 1, both displays are tuned into channel 1, but now they're showing the left and right display content. Now, if we play content that does not support subchannels at all, they're just going to show the default same content that goes to both. So there's a lot to this. It gets pretty powerful, especially when we get into some of these more advanced ones for control rooms. But hopefully for now, that's at least enough that you could stumble your way through it in the future. Okay, let's get to the meat of things. My goodness, I've been moving too slow on some of these things. I'll give you a quick overview of, well, actually, first let's bring in a camera. And let's do a, actually, we'll do a video bar. Okay, let's do, gosh, all right, we'll do the X72. X72 is fun. As I'm dragging it around, I can snap it, but you also see these little spiral orbs that show up above and below the display. These are snap points. So when I snap the camera to that guy, now it is mounted to the bottom of the display. As I resize the display, it's going to stick with it. So all of our more recent video bars and cameras that actually have a VESA mount or a monitor mount, and in those cases, you'll often see those snap points appear as you're dragging it around. But in this case, we just want it centered. We'll say below in this case. Now when we go to the properties panel for this video bar, we're again going to see a very different set of options available to you. In this particular case, we could force the mount type to change, but auto works well here. We can adjust the mount angle, but most importantly, we can see a preview of what the far end is going to see. And if we click full screen camera view, that gives us a much larger view, but man, this would be more informative if we could see people in here. And that's where we come to the Assistance tab. Now, there's a lot of available assistants. We're not going to go through most of them today. And if you've already installed Modus, you might discover that Discus is not in there because I'm on a pre-release. Discus will be available in the next release of Modus, slated for later this summer. But for now, all we want to do is show people in seats. So I come to the Assistants, click on this guy. It's going to give us two options, facing forward or facing screen. For now, we're just going to do facing forward, and this populates all of these seats with randomized people. And this is where this camera view becomes so powerful. We can immediately see how well this view is going to work in the layout, and I actually picked a decent one. Usually I have the room set up to where you can see under the table, which is its own set of problems. Like if we pulled that back and let's see here, if we move all of these chairs back, then we can start to see where this could be a problem, right? Maybe we need to adjust things. But really, this view alone is so powerful in terms of getting stakeholders on the same page about what they need. Now, for this particular camera, it does not support mechanical tilt. You have to manually do that with the mount. Whereas if we were to compare that with I'll do a rally camera. It's a little bit older now, but it'll still get the point across. If we jump into this guy, you can see we have a lot of tilt and pan. Now, this is important to note. We work closely with the manufacturers to make sure that these views and functionality are accurate. So if you place a camera in Modus, you can work with a high level of confidence knowing this is going to do what you need it to do. Quick little fun thing that we've added recently, if just like navigating normally in Modus, in camera view, if you hold the right mouse button, you can navigate the camera, and that will be constrained by the camera's capabilities. So if this camera only has a limited amount of pan and tilt, you won't be able to move it around as much, and then the mouse wheel will zoom in and out. So it's a great way to quickly line up that shot. Okay, now in the remaining few minutes, I want to show you a couple of other things here just in terms of stuff to be aware of, stuff to help. If you bring in a microphone, for example, if you want to show those visualizations, those are usually found in the properties panel. So show mic pattern. That's how you would visualize that. Even with cameras, you can show the field of view. Same thing if you bring in a in-ceiling speaker. This visualization is not available on all speakers. It depends on what we've done with the manufacturer. But the generic, and I'll just bring in two of these. The generic has a show speaker coverage option. And like all the generic objects in Modus, you can control its spec and properties more so than you might be able to with others. Okay, so we have this room built, and I'm going to call out something important just from a making your life easier, making Modus more productive for you standpoint. I'm going to save this, and we'll call this our, let's see, I'm just going to call this our medium example. You guys aren't seeing my file browser, but I have one up right now. When it asks you to save, or once you tell it to save, it's going to ask you to take a photo, and that'll be used as your thumbnail in your file browsing. This is really important. Modus projects are highly flexible and highly reusable. And so in most cases, you really don't need to be starting from scratch each time. Even though once you're familiar with Modus, once you have a couple hours under your belt, you'd be able to build this room in 10 minutes. Even then, that's 10 minutes you don't need to be spending in Modus. So our strong recommendation is you build up a library of best practice rooms. And this is also a really good way just to get comfortable with Modus. Build your huddle space, your small, your medium, and large. and just do it based on your own reference designs, and then save those. Keep those in a special spot. Don't make them client specific. And then when a client comes to you and says, hey, we need to do this room, and you're like, okay, yeah, that fits in this category, but it's not quite right. Let me show you how easy that is to change. So imagine now that we are starting from on a new day, and somebody's come to you and they need a room kind of like this. This is where you come into your project and you would say, hey, all right, I need to change my dimensions. What we need is actually a little bit smaller. It's only 22 feet long and it's only 16 feet wide, but the ceiling is 10 feet taller. Now, we're shrinking the floor plan of this room, but increasing the height. And so when I hit OK, the room's going to go dark and it's going to come back, and some things will have shuffled around in some important ways to note. First, since we increased the ceiling height, our door is now floating, so I need to adjust that. Since we decreased the length of the room, our windows are now sticking out. I just need to resize those really quick. And if I want them to be floor to ceiling, I need to make them taller. And our lights are no longer the right amount of lights for this space, so I might need to adjust that and position these a little bit differently. And then, of course, the table's in a slightly different position, but it might be okay. From here, maybe we need to make some aesthetic changes. Maybe they've got a kind of a wooden front wall, and I don't know, maybe they've got a whiteboard or something. Anyway, their finishes might be a little bit different, but I was able to get to presentation ready results now in a minute rather than 10 minutes or 20 minutes. And so keep this ability in mind, especially if you find yourself on a call with a client and they're talking about something that would be so easy to resolve if you could just show them. That's where these become such a powerful tool, because you can, as you're talking, you say, you know what, let me just show you something. And maybe in the background, you've been prepping the room for an extra minute or two, and you say, look, here's what you're talking about. We've said this. Here's why you want the camera above or below the display, or here's why you really want to do 2 instead of 1. Having those simple rooms already built it's a secret weapon that I don't feel like enough customers actually do in Modus, but I feel like they should. It's an awesome little tool there. Okay, we are pretty much at time, so hopefully you don't have too many questions backlogged, but we're happy to stick around a little bit longer and answer any questions. Patrick and Riley, do we have any that we for sure want to cover?
I don't see any. There was one that was more of a feature request that I could just call out real quickly. And it looks like there's some typing happening as well. Yeah. Nathan asked, are there future plans to introduce the ability for one-off he said for line of sight viewing per individual seat, so just in one per participant in the room versus the all-encompassing version.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There aren't current plans to do that, but we certainly could. The way that you would do that today, so for those that aren't familiar, Modus has a sight lines design assistant. The way this works is, in this case, we don't need to have a seat selected because it is for everyone, but you do select a screen. And so basically, this assistant requires an individual screen, and then it has everybody look to that screen, and you determine if they have an unobstructed view or not to that screen. As you might expect, everybody on this side has a clear view and people on this side do not, which is why that little indicator is flickering. So if you really wanted to do this today with what's in production, what you could do is disable all of the other seats from using a head in calculations, and that would do the trick. So let me show you how to do that. So I'm going to select all of the seats but one. So basically, I just selected everything and then control clicked to deselect. So I'm changing the properties of all of the chairs except for this one. And when you come to the properties, you have this person section. And if you disable enabled, if you toggle enabled, there we go, all of those heads will disappear. Now, the downside, though, is you now lose all of the heads, which are usually the problem with line of sight. But that would be the closest thing we would have to getting you there today. It's like if you were looking for line of sight in, I don't know, an architectural heavy place, you could do that. Otherwise, we would need to expose an option. But I think it's a reasonable request. I would love, actually, if I would love it if you could send an email to support@modusvr.com and share a little bit more about what's driving that request. I would love to learn, to understand it better, to make sure that whatever we did fits well into the scenario. And sometimes there's other ways that we could solve it.
There was a question that came up. So Ben's asking, why are the graphics constantly flicking between red and green? Can you just explain how that works?
Yes, that is a wonderful question. So
it's not a bug.
No, it's not, but it's a reasonable question. So what's essentially happening is every single viewer is aware of the boundaries of the screen. So we're technically only checking around the outside, not the center screen, because unless you have a drone flying, anything that's obscuring the view of the screen is going to obscure the edge. So that's one simplification. But what's happening is they are randomly drawing a line, or they are drawing a line to a random point along the perimeter of the screen. And if it makes it to the screen, it's green. And if it hits something else before it hits the screen, it's red. And so that's why you see that flickering. And so this is helpful in a couple of ways. One, if it's flickering, if it's like mostly red, or if it's mostly green, but only occasionally red, that's a pretty good indicator that most of the screen is not obstructed, just a very small amount. The other thing this helps with is if you're in an auditorium scenario where you have hundreds and hundreds of seats, if we were doing that sightline check 1,000 times per user every time the screen is drawn, your computer would just melt. It wouldn't be able to keep up with it. So by doing it kind of staggered like that, it allows us to scale it out to really large audiences. I don't know if I explained that very well, but basically it's an optimization. It's a byproduct of an optimization.
Excellent. One other question popped up. Are the trial periods renewable or is it one and done? Typically, they're one-offs. We did just set everybody's trial to be renewable at Infocom, however, and those are new extended 30-day trials. So if you want to sign up for a trial because you haven't done it before or you want to renew your trial, you can use the link that I'm posting in chat. And Micah, just send me an email if it doesn't work for any reason. I know I think you signed up for your trial like right before Infocom. But yeah, you should be able to do a re-up on your trial period. And then we may actually extend those as well every time we have a new release or something like that for a few days so people can tinker with new features. With that, we are over time. So like Ken mentioned, we'll stick around if there's additional questions, but we do appreciate everybody hanging out with us for the last 45 minutes, 52 minutes technically. And thank you all for joining. And hopefully we'll see you next week. Again, we're doing the documentation training on Tuesday the 30th, I guess. Tuesday the 30th I believe that one's at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. We also have an advanced training next Thursday, so I'll post links for both of those here, and you can register if you're not already set up for that. But with that, thank you all for joining, and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody.
Some questions coming in.
Oh. Yeah. Keep them coming.
So let's see here. Trent asked, is it possible to show voice tracking with cameras and ceiling microphones? That is a wonderful question, actually, Trent. You want to tackle that one, or are you already out of the environment?
Oh, I live in the environment. That's my secret. I'm always here. Okay, so we do some of that. We show it for microphones. So for example, let me bring in a TCCM. That should be a good size for this room. Give it a little bit of a drop there. And when you enable the mic pattern for this, this gives you the upside down dome like you would expect. And then you see a beam just sitting idle in the room. Now, if you're in VR and you start talking to your headset, that beam will track you, which is kind of a fun thing. But if we want it to track one of these people, which is really powerful here, and I'm going to lower the mic even more. All you have to do is select one of the seats, come to your properties panel, and below the person section, we have a talking section. And there's two controls here. One is just toggling it on and off. And when I turn this on, you'll see that beam starts following this individual, and they have a little speech bubble above them. And as I move them around, the beam tracks them. And as I move them outside the tracking area, the beam returns to where you'd expect. But also for more advanced microphones, let's see here. If we enable talking for this individual, they're talking at the same level as this person. So the mic correctly continues tracking the person that was speaking first. But if we increase their volume, then the microphone starts tracking them. Now, and the visualization here is going to vary based on the manufacturer, based on what their spec says it does. So like the Cisco ceiling microphone, for example, it has multiple beams that can track multiple people, whereas the TCCM has a single beam. But this extends within that ecosystem as well. So let's say, okay, this room is a bad example, so I'll just make it a lot longer. Make it 40 feet long. This is going to make no sense, but that's okay. So let's say that we had a lectern up at the front of the room, and we wanted to have a speaker, somebody that would likely be standing. Here's another fun thing. In the objects, we also have a person that you can just drag in a person and position them. So by default, you'll always have a person attached to a chair, but every now and then you need one that's standing. So we've got this person here, and they also have the same talking options that chairs do. And here's the issue. This guy is talking at the same or lower volume than everybody else in the room, so he's not being picked up. And this is a great part about the Sennheiser story is priority zones. So just while we're on the topic here, I'll go a little bit deeper. With the mic pattern enabled, we can also enable priority. And so if I now that I have this priority zone, which is indicated in green, I can move this over and look at that. He takes priority, even if he is talking much quieter than everyone else. So just another really cool way to tell the story. We also do a similar thing with exclusion zones. So if we had, this is going to make no sense at all, but let's say we had a vent right here, a giant vent, and the microphone is always getting picked up by that. We can also set up exclusion zones that work in the exact same way in terms of control. We just kind of size that. And if you're familiar with the Sennheiser setup application, I can't remember what they call it. Anyway,
Control cockpit.
Control cockpit. I knew it had something to do with airplanes. Cockpit. A lot of these concepts are very similar to how you interact. They're just not quite the same level with 3D. So you can also tell that story for exclusion zones. And then if this individual happened to get in the way of it, and this person's not talking, and this person's not talking, the microphone is going to try to pick her up, but it actually stops short, which is how the TCCM behaves. That beam will actually stop short of where they are. So it's a really cool thing. Anyway, so that's what we do for tracking speakers with just microphones. What we do not do, at least today, is tie that back to inform a camera system. So if you have like a One Beyond camera, we don't have an automated way to play all of that out. So that's going to become really on you as the operator to be able to tell that story. So you could basically mimic that. But there's not a current way to tie that all together. We have interest in doing that. The challenge we face is basically being able to stay on top of accurately representing that behavior of how those systems work together. The firmware on those things are just evolving so quickly. It's a challenge for us to make sure we're doing it and not misrepresenting or over-representing the capabilities there.
Excellent.
Any others?
I think we have tapered down to the last few and no other questions coming in. Like I said, I'll stick around for a few more minutes here just to make sure that there aren't any lingering questions that people are just waiting until they're the only attendee left. But with that, thank you all for joining this afternoon or morning, whatever time it is, wherever you are. And we look forward to seeing you next week on Tuesday the 30th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time for getting the most out of your Modus files. We'll cover deliverables and documentation. Everybody have a great afternoon or evening. I don't know where everybody's at, but enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good one.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.